Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here. So, it is time to do, it is the start of the final build series, like the final set of builds here. This is going to be a little bit of a series. I am going to put this in a playlist, so just check the playlist tab and y'all will see the final set of, it'll probably be called something like Final Destiny stuff or Destiny Finale. Um, Not only this set of builds, but the same for Solar, Void, Stasis, and Strand when they are posted will be there as well. Also, my final dungeon rankings and final raid rankings as well will be there. So keep in mind here as I go through this. Not this upcoming Sunday, but the Sunday after will be my final Destiny 2 stream. After that, Destiny will be completely done. And in terms of me playing it, that sort of thing, especially on stream. The dungeons ranked and raid ranks will be split into two videos because it's just too long. I'll just be honest, it is like my last recording attempt was 2 hours and 30 minutes, so I think I am going to be splitting it into two videos here. So that is, something to keep in mind here. Besides, I want to showcase a lot more of the raid areas than the dungeon areas, because those raid areas are very, very, very important. So that is something of note here. Now, also, another side note, the last raid I have to record is Vow the Disciple. If I can get Salvation's Edge done, I will try my best to do that, but do not expect the Salvation's Edge to necessarily appear in the Raids Ranked video. So that's something to keep in mind as we go forward. But that intro stuff is only going to be for this particular video. I'm only going to reiterate the playlist stuff for the subsequent builds. Now, how these builds are handled here, it's going to be slightly different from build to build, so this part is extremely important. Some of these are, yes, old builds that I loved using, some with a new twist or something like that, and some of these are new builds that I have concocted. So, for every video, there will at least be a new build that I've concocted, and for most of them, there will be an old build I like to use, or it'll be a different situation. With Ark here, I have an old setup I used to use, and then I have a new build for y'all that I quite enjoy as well. At the end of the video, y'all will be seeing damage comparisons between the two builds. So on that note, though, let's go ahead and reveal it. Now this here is an old style Ark build. Yes, now in case I do not know, Palindrome was not always Ark. It was Void when it would previously was around. So it has changed elements slightly. Again, some of these, again, old build, new twist. Now this was for Deepstone Crypt. I had to show my love for Deepstone Crypt. Might as well slap on that emblem there. Slap on that Atrax emblem. Super cool emblem. But for those of y'all that have been on the channel an extremely long period of time, like you would have had to been on this channel for the infancy phase, or know me personally, this was the old-fashioned I used to rock. Now, at the time, I believe I used Amethyst Veil for the shader, but this time I just used Super Black just to make it look cleaner. But this was the old-fashioned I used to rock here. Now, the helmet, arms, and legs are from an old Solstice event. The other stuff is from Eververse or just the default ornament here. I did not change the shipper spare because, I'm not necessarily doing that. Now, the key differences here are going to be in subclass, armor set bonuses, and that sort of thing. But real quick, we are going to get into the subclass stuff here. Now, we are using Rally Barricade, of course, T-Crash, Seismic Strike, Pulse Grenade. This is mainly for raids. This is a setup that I pretty much mainly used for raids. However, outside of Deepstone Crypt, for the most part, instead of using Anarchy, I swap out for Particle Deconstruction and Sleeper Simulant, but the rest of the build still works perfectly fine. Of course, we're using Storm's Keep for obvious reasons, and then Touch of Thunder to buff that Pulse Grenade, and again, Spark of Magnitude to buff it further. And then we're using Spark of Discharge. The first part of this perk doesn't really matter that much, but the second part does. Collecting an Ionic Trace grants you a stack of Bolt Charge. Pulse Grenade, of course, spawns Ionic Traces. This one, defeating a jolted target, creates an Ionic Trace. And then this one is just amplified. The effects are increased. The effects are increased and you gain increased stacks of Bolt Charge from all sources. That is to help buff Storm's Keep. So to keep in mind, if you're using this in the team, Storm's Keep does not stack anymore. So that's something to keep in mind. It has not stacked for quite some time. Now, into our artifact here, something to keep in mind here, the artifact will be quite different between all the builds. So this is important. We are using the Slayer Baron artifact here. We're using Trace Evidence here. The rapid precision hits don't necessarily matter. The picking up Ionic Trace is kind of just a general all. It's like, you know what? Pretty solid, and it doesn't rapid final blows on targets affected by Jolt or Blind generate Ionic Traces, so more Ionic Traces, beautiful. Mobility doesn't really matter, but again, this first column, this first set of stuff doesn't really matter. For the second row, we're using Weakened Clear, which I'm shocked that it's there, because again, we're using Anarchy. You're using this one, collecting an orb of power, collecting an elemental pickup, or collecting an orb of power, or destroying a tangle grants you a small amount of health. We're using this mainly for that perk specifically. We don't necessarily care about the first part. And then finishers, this is just a, fine thing or whatever. There's not too much powerful in the second column. But we're using kinetic impacts. This does mean Anarchy can technically be unstop as well, and Overload. And then, of course, Arc Soul Sources deal increased damage to blind targets. This is not going to help as much as one would think. We're mainly using this to really feature Anarchy here. However, if you want to swap out something, you can swap out your pulse grenade for a flashbang grenade, so you can flashbang grenade. You will have to change that fragment because it's not going to help you, but throw the flashbang grenade, then Thunder Crash, but this wasn't too much of an issue. Now, you can swap this out for Succession, but we're using Heritage, not OG Heritage, because I don't have these enhanced on it yet, and I don't have, of course, these enhanced at all, but you can, of course, put enhanced perks on it if you so choose. But we have Reconstruction and originally Recombination. However, I would say do Focus Fury instead with Anarchy specifically. If you are using a different linear, if like you're using a different arc linear or something like that, and you're trying to keep it arc, Recombination is good for a one hit and then use your other weapon for damage. So we're using Focus Fury here. And then Palindrome. Palindrome is the new iteration, and it's Arc, finally, another Arcane Cannon. It is from Pinnacle Ops here. You can focus Palindrome right here. So that is something that you can do here. But I have on Explode Payload and Volt Shot. That's my personal preferred role. And then, of course, I'm using this. When you use your class ability, Final Blows, those weapon gets you bonus damage resist. That's fine. However, you can also use Wildcard as well. Wildcard is very solid as well. I would recommend either this one or this one. But I would probably go with Wildcard, especially if you don't necessarily want to do Volt Shot. So, and of course, you're using Anarchy. We do have the Catalyst done. Dealing repeated damage with this weapon inflicts Jolt, while Amplified Jolt is applied faster. This is very useless. This is extraordinarily useless unless you tag a champion. Anarchy natively is Overload, so that is something to keep in mind. It can do Unstop with the Kinetic Tremors, but this thing is only used. That Catalyst is only useful for champions, and that's kind of. So, because likely you're just going to nuke the champion. But other than all, the Catalyst is just not particularly great in my opinion. It does have a new little perk here called Impromptu Ammunition. Final blows increase ammo meter progress from all sources for a short time. It is actually quite good for like damage encounters, that sort of thing. Now for the armor set bonus, we're using Legacy's Oath. Mostly for the 4-piece set, but kind of for the 2-piece set as well. Powered melees release an additional disorienting pulse when used to defeat a target. It just spreads the AoE of the shoulder charge. Not particularly useful though. However, when your shields are broken by a combatant or upon casting your super, release a swarm of heat-seeking micro missiles. The missiles don't do that much damage, but the damage increase is pretty good. However, when your shields are broken is kind of underrated here. On Arc specifically, that does actually happen quite a bit. So that is kind of helpful. However, it can lead to some issues sometimes, but it's a pretty solid armor set bonus. We are using a different one. For almost all of the builds, I will not be using the 2 same armor pieces. You will see Legacy's Oath reappear again, but not for the next build or whatever. Now, in terms of stat, just so y'all can see my armor mods, I do recommend having hands-on and heavy-handed because Curse of the Falling Star gives you bonus super energy for melee. Then, of course, you can see all of my other stuff here. For some reason, I don't have anything in this class item. Now, I actually... Super is your main thing here. Super is your main thing. I do recommend having Super Font here. I would say if your weapon stat is higher than 100 or higher, sorry. If your weapon stat is 100 or higher, you should have on your whatever elemental surge you have, not weapons font. Only have the weapons on if one, your heavy weapon is the main thing you are using, and you need that heavy ammo drop increase. Or if it's below 100. If it's below 100, then you use the weapons font. Other than that, you should be using a surge mod. So that's something to keep in mind. So in order of stats, your top 2 stats should be super and weapons. Those should be your 2 stats. Class, ironically, does not need to be that high. Your grenade also does not need to be that high either. As long as melee is at about 70, you're doing pretty good here. So that is something to keep in mind. Of course, we do have a grenade font to help buff that stat a little bit further. But your super and weapon are the most important stats here. Alright though, on that note though, we are going to be doing Glassway here for this particular build, just so y'all can see how it generally works here. We are going to be doing no champions. I will be showing y'all, you know, what difficulty and that sort of thing I'm launching here, because we are going to be launching a solo, not on a team. So I'll catch y'all here in a minute. Alright, so for this setup here, this is what we got. We're on Expert here. This is where I anticipate a lot of people are going to be at here, you know, over the course of general time. It's not where everybody is at now, but this is kind of where things are going to be at here. Again, I'm not doing Master. This is just 15 under. Yeah, this is 15 under. This is 20, but, you know, we're not going to do this match mate necessarily, because, again, we would have to deal with champions here, so... And champions is not a mechanic that I'm necessarily going to be explaining or anything like that here. Again, your alternative option for Heritage, if you do need Unstoppable, which technically speaking this build can still handle with the melee, I would personally suggest you go ahead and swap it out for Succession. Now, first off, do you need Heritage or Succession? Succession craftable? No, but I would recommend you have them craftable, if I'm being perfectly honest here. Now, I am picking Glassway for a reason. I am picking Glassway for a reason here, so...
We're not strangers anymore, little light.
But yeah, y'all, these build videos are going to be a little bit longer here. Mainly because I'm kind of doing strikes. Also, you know, Deepstone Crypt, Gamma with Beyond Light, Glassway with Beyond Light, you know, hey, I'm playing these things. But I figured like some strikes y'all probably have not seen in quite some time, so I'm going to be trying to do this stag. You do want to reload quite regularly. What the fuck? Now just keep in mind, you do not have knockout with this build, so you cannot heal from just melee. Your main source of healing is going to be these Orbs of Power, and of course a little bit from the Ionic Traces, so just keep that in mind here. That you're not actually getting any health. And also don't pay attention to my misses. We probably won't be doing the whole strike, just enough to showcase kind of everything here. Now probably, we definitely won't be doing the whole entire strike. Right there, it procced. Most orange enemies like that only need 2 shots. Yeah, we're just going to progress here a little bit. that bolt charge automatically deposit. Woo-wee! See? Bam, right there. Giant AoE. Giant AoE there. And of course, when we get into here, we'll just tag a couple times and Thunder Crash. Even though we really don't need to. And I will say, it doesn't appear that the micro missiles have much of an internal cooldown. Okay, but that's kind of how that build operates. That's kind of how that operates. So, however, y'all will be seeing that build more so return with boss damage. So, on that note though, we're going to go ahead and get into the next build here. Now, this build here is the new build. So, of course, y'all can see some of the little details here, just so y'all can peep the fashion. Even though if you've, been paying attention to the streams, you kind of already know what the fashion is. But this is what we're going with for Necrochasm. Now, Necrochasm is our main weapon here. Of course, using that Sivo ornament here. And, of course, you have the Catalyst done. I do recommend having the Catalyst done. So, is it super necessary? Not really, but I would recommend it. Now, of course, we are using Thunder Crash still. We are using Growly Barricade, Pulse Grenade, of course. We are using Knockout, though. We are not using Touch of Thunder here, because meleeing is more of our bread and butter here, and we're using Storm's Keep. The exact same setup as previous as well. Except for this one, we're using Spark of Resistance while surrounded by combatants who are more resistant to incoming damage. That's going to be important for the little perks that we got here. But for our energy weapon, we are using Irritive Loop with Controlled Burst and Supercharged Magazine, because it loads by itself, which is really nice. And then we're using Nano Tracer missiles. I would suggest, because it adds a little bit more damage over time, I would really suggest that you have this indeed these enhanced. And of course, we have Song of Ur-Yut to keep with some theme. Now, keep in mind, I have Reconstruction Bait and Switch on here, but I actually recommend that you have Target Lock on here instead. I'll explain a little bit later. Also, what the fuck? Y'all don't need this. Probably better to have that instead. And of course, we do have, Curse Thrall as the origin trait. After defeating a target with a melee attack, final blows of this weapon causes targets to explode for an improved duration. In case y'all cannot tell, this build is all about Curse Thrall explosions. All about them. Now, before we get into our armor stuff, let's get into our artifact here. Now, of course, we have Elemental Siphon here. This lets Necrochasm double dip into Ionic Traces. Also, Elemental Pickups grant matching super energy when they are collected. So, those Ionic Traces are giving us extra Thunder Crash energy. Now, Necrochasm is interesting in terms of it is one of the few kinetic primary ammo weapons that can technically spawn an Elemental Pickup. So, the other one is Ace of Spades. In terms of exotics, and of course, any kinetic weapon that has Firefly on it is able to generate a Fire Sprite, because if they die from that solar explosion, not from the bullet itself, it counts as solar damage. For Necrochasm, if the enemy dies from the Cursed Thrall poison, it counts as arc damage and not kinetic damage, so this lets Necrochasm double dip in there, because just letting them die from the poison is a little finicky. And also, defeating Arc debuff targets grants Bolt Charge. Rapidly defeating Arc debuff targets spawns an Orb of Power and heals a small portion of health. This does not help that much. I'm gonna be real here. This is mainly to help blind and that sort of thing. This is mainly to help blinding, that sort of thing. And then, of course, we do have the whole of the line for machine guns here. because we're using machine gun as a heavy. Then gold from lead pickup special ammo has a chance to grant heavy ammo. It's quite nice, even though our machine gun's not our main thing here. When you have maximum bolt charge, you also become amplified. Lightning bolts deal more damage. That's pretty darn good, because the only way we're really going to be depositing bolt charge outside of just doing strict damage is with our melees and whatnot. Now, Limit Break casting a super while you are critically wounded or have an elemental buff grants a period of increased super damage. That is for Thundercrash to buff Thundercrash specifically. And Amplified is the most easiest thing to get. So, and our other one is Particle Reconstruction. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, Hot Sauce Man, you're using an LMG. Aren't you using that as your damage weapon? No. This weapon's kind of interesting. Also, again, can't blind, but I would recommend if you are dealing with Ensemble Champions, I would actually swap out Pulse Grenade for Flashbang Grenade, and I would swap this out for Spark of Shock. So for Spark of Shock, honestly. I don't know why I said it like that. But, get rid of Loop here as our actual boss damage weapon. This is our boss league weapon. This is more of our special weapon, which is why I recommend you have target lock on this and not bait and switch. But, yeah, Irritative Loop here is being treated as our heavy weapon, and Saga of Ryu is being treated here as our special weapon. So that's something that's quite interesting here. Now for the armor set bonus. We're using the Crota's End armor set bonus. Melee final blows trigger a Cursed Thrall explosion. This does not just apply to powered melees. It just has to be a melee final blow. It doesn't have to be powered. Then being in combat for a duration grants progressively more flinch resistance and damage resistance versus combatants. That 4-piece bonus is honestly quite nice as well. But again, remember, I don't usually go for builds that are just generic good. But I like building around certain themes and that sort of thing. Because, Joe Hendry and whatnot. Now, in terms of stats, the weapon is kind of important. Weapon's kind of important. The weapon damage bonus from weapons is not that big, as you can see with primary weapons. It's 2.9%. In my opinion, your weapon should be at 100 and nothing more than that. However, I can't get my weapon stat to be lower, and I'm not refarming, as y'all can see. No weapon mod here. So, super is quite important. I would actually recommend having it higher than 100. To push it past 100, that's why I'm using Super Font here. You do need Kinetic Siphon and Harmonic Siphon. You do need both for this build. Now, Grenade just needs to be at 70. Doesn't need to be more than that. However, Melee does need to be above 100. I would recommend Melee being above 100 here, because your Melee is kind of going to be key here. I would personally say, if we're looking at armor set here, I would recommend here having Paragon armor. If you're going for a particular armor set thing, I would suggest having Paragon armor for the most part. Super, and then Melee. Then you can move around your stats accordingly. Now, of course, you can see the rest of my stats here. These two are to help the grenade cooldown more so than the melee itself. And again, we're using heavy-handed. Our exotic here is, of course, Curse of the Falling Star. So, again, melee kills help regenerate more super. So, yeah, and then, of course, we have kinetic ammo generation because our main weapon is kinetic here. So that is something to keep in mind here. And again, this build does great damage as well because of particle deconstruction. Now, we will be doing a solo, kind of Lost Sector type deal. We will be doing a solo op for this build specifically. Again, for the old builds, I don't necessarily need to show as much necessarily as with the new builds and whatnot, because the old builds, they were great for a reason. And besides, the Anarchy setup is more so used for a boss encounter specifically, and that's kind of hard to simulate by yourself. And especially nowadays, even in Vanguard ops, the average Guardian is just so strong at this point that it's quite difficult to see those kinds of things. However, this setup is more of an all-purpose. It is more so a campaign setup, but I'm not going to show you an entire campaign mission, so I will be showing y'all a solo op here. Alright, so this is going to be our setup for Skywatch here. This is on Master difficulty. Again, you can get up to S while still being under both Grandmaster and Ultimate. But we do have equipment locked here, anti-barrier, and of course, counterfeit, chill touch, and then Meteor's grasp. And of course, nothing to buff ourselves directly here. So that's going to be kind of that whole shebang. Now, again, I do like setups. People do not know that where Chill Touch kind of does nothing. Because if they are in melee range, I can do a Curse Wall Explosion. Now, I keep in mind, this build is more so going to particularly struggle against certain enemy types. Just to give you that heads up. Like for Vex, for example, Vex, trying to get a weak point on a lot of Vex, unless they are Harpies, is quite a problem. But like Fallen, Hive, Scorn, Cabal, like the rest of the enemies, it's not that bad to get, crits on them.
Keep your eyes on the objectives, and we'll let you know when their reinforcements
And again, just keep in mind, this is our heavy weapon, essentially. This is more so our alternative weapon. So yeah, it doesn't... Being able to spawn those ionic traces, it doesn't punish you as severely for not being able to hit your crits. Which is nice. Now I know I might be asking yourself, but what about, isn't Legend of Acreus your favorite weapon? Of course, we couldn't get that to proc, but Curse Wall Explosion. Now, the Curse Wall Explosion itself, is the AoE on it's not super duper wide. So that is something to keep in mind here. Just pretty nuked him. Well. Ooh, that almost nuked me. It does help a knockout because it gets him low enough to perish. One for Thrall and all for Thrall. And as you can see, we have our super back. We have our super back, which is honestly quite nice. We're just gonna Thunder Crash here to eliminate all of them. Knowing where we'll probably have it back before too long. And just a reminder, the Cursed Thrall Explosion is mainly to help it also does pop shields, which is nice as well. And it does increase the potency of Song of Ryu, you know? So... Okay, and this is where we, use some of our... Again, I would recommend you have target lock on this LMG, not main switch. As I'll get into a little bit later when we get to more of a damage setup. There we are. Alright, and what I will say, about some of the other builds is some of them are might not necessarily be super duper meta nowadays. It's more so going to be for the case with Strand in terms of no one really runs how Strand was originally ran. Like post Banner of War. Like, especially when you have like a wave of ads. If he burns, so just to get him weak enough. Hipfire precision shot like that's kind of crazy, low key. Woo! I will say this build does struggle with distance. In terms of like without that LMG, ooh, this thing can struggle with distance. He's moving. Beautiful. As you can see, it kind of... A Curse All Explosion does kind of help a little bit. Oh. Beautiful. Didn't have to reload either. Didn't have to reload a single bit.
That's the sector cleared. Good work, Guardian.
Clear.
So yeah, there is this setup here. Now, I will be seeing y'all in the little testing area to show y'all the difference in boss damage. Alright, everyone. So, we're going to go ahead here and showcase some of the damage numbers here. Now, something to keep in mind here, particle reconstruction is going to be kind of carrying us quite a bit here. Now, we are going to be giving ourselves, you know, full orbs, but that's going to be it. Everything else is I'm going to completely reset it, like amplified everything, so you'll be seeing all of it completely fresh. So we're just going to get ourselves 4 orbs. Alright, now we just Thunder Crash. I messed this up actually, hold on a minute. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and do the damage for this golden goose of a setup. So we're actually going to Bolt Charge first. Do that. We're waiting until we get amplified. And then Thunder Crash for that extra damage. And we're just gonna blow our load. Until we just completely empty the magazine. For about 34.5, yes, for about 34k. So 34.5k. That's really, 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 really solid. That is really, really solid. And by the way, the bait, I'm not even going to show you the bait and switch shotgun. It's even worse. It is so much worse. But I am going to show you the shotgun next. Now, something that I do want to mention here. Something I do need to mention here. So, if you want to optimize this damage, I would replace the Palindrome here with, I would replace the Palindrome here with a shotgun that has bait and switch on it. Very few exist, though. But this is just going to be this setup on its own. So again, we're going to do this. Usually I actually want to be way up more up close than I am, but it's one of those oh well situations. And we have to reload. So just that with our barricade, lastly we have our barricade back, we can reproc it, but it is 37. So that's just something to keep in mind there. Again, the Necrochasm build is not far behind. That setup is not terribly far behind, which is kind of insane. However, this can go on for a lot longer. Just to demonstrate here, I do have a shotgun in my vault here just to demonstrate to y'all how insane the damage can actually get. I will be demonstrating that for y'all here. Alright, so again, this is just to show y'all how insane the damage can get. So we'll actually Thunder Crash, Grenade, just so that we're a lot more up close. And then we're out of shotgun ammo. And our barricade just ended as well. Yeah, 47. So a bait and switch shotgun can go extremely potent. However, if you are doing that, I actually recommend you have I recommend that you actually have recombination here instead of Focus Fury. The point of Focus Fury is for Heritage to be the shine of the alternate option other than Anarchy. However, it's going to be more potent if you have recombination. You are going to have to get enough kills to get full stacks of recombination, but especially if you have that perk enhance, it should not be that hard to do. So yeah, just a little bit of a recap here. Necrochasm, all it was literally just a fusion, and then of course make sure you have Amplify, bada bing, bada boom. And this is more of a Lost like this is more for solo activities, campaigns, that sort of thing. That was doing 34.5k damage. And then for, of course, Anarchy, this setup was doing about 37, so not that much more, but you add that bait and switch shotgun in there, it did 10k more. It did 10k more. So that is something to keep in mind. And that is for raids specifically. Do keep in mind, you can swap out Heritage for Succession. However, I think I would probably swap it out for Supremacy instead, or Predator's Revenge with rewind rounds and kinetic tremors or something like that. But Succession is a really good alternate option as well. Or if you want to get a little fancy, you can use a fusion rifle in its place. However, if a boss is up close, you have enough in your abilities toolkit, and Anarchy has enough ammo to help you with Ad Clear a little bit now. I would actually recommend you kind of use a bait and switch shotgun. And maybe you can use a primary ammo weapon as your other slot, but I would recommend you have a weapon with recombination on it in that kinetic slot. If you want to have Succession being your recombination or whatever, that's perfectly fine. Usually, though, you just have Heritage, Reconstruction, Recombination, that sort of thing. Anyways, though, on that note, though, let me know what you think about these builds in the comments below. Do y'all prefer the Anarchy shotgun build, or do y'all prefer the Necrochasm build? Let me know what y'all think in the comments below here. Next up will be Solar. We're gonna do Arc, then Solar, then Void, then it'll be Strand, and then Stasis will be last. So that'll be the order. Actually, no, Stasis will be last. Well, Strand will be last. Stasis will be second to last. There will be no prismatic setup. I have none of the prismatic stuff has changed. So especially like there's no new or old builds. So any of the old prismatic builds still are the exact same as they were when I made them. So because even the consecration nerf, the consecration build I made, it didn't nerf any part of the build itself, because the damage of consecration wasn't the potent part about that build of contact inmost. It was you could just nuke the entire room without the slam down. That was the thing, because you just jolt everything, and then the slam down would finish it off, I guess. But on that note, though, I do appreciate y'all for tuning in, and I'll catch y'all on the flip side.